The universe is not as loud as we imagine. It whispers. Between glowing galaxies stretch endless spaces where darkness is not an enemy, but a place where everything can breathe. The universe is like a midnight ocean, where stars are only scattered sparks, and most of it is silence drifting slowly. And it is this emptiness that allows everything to endure, to remain calm, to stay ordered. If the universe could speak, would it be proud of its stars, or of the vast spaces that surround them? Leave a comment and share how you feel about this emptiness, as an absence or as a quiet gift. And to understand why the universe chose emptiness as the foundation of all things, we must return to its first moment, when it had not yet learned how to be silent. What does it truly mean to call the universe empty, when emptiness is the very condition that allows anything at all to endure? We tend to fear empty rooms, silent pauses, unanswered spaces. We associate fullness with safety, abundance with meaning. So when astronomy tells us that the universe is overwhelmingly empty, our instinct is to hear loss rather than design. But the cosmos is not lacking. It is spacious. And there is a profound difference between absence and allowance. Look closely, and the word empty begins to dissolve. What remains is not nothingness, but distance stretched beyond intuition, between stars, between galaxies, between the bright islands of matter we love to photograph. There are gaps so vast that language itself struggles to cross them. Yet those gaps are not mistakes. They are not leftovers. They are the architecture. Imagine standing in a desert at night, not the kind with endless dunes, but one so large that even the horizon feels shy. A single lantern burns far away, steady and patient. The darkness around it is not competing with the light. It is protecting it. Without that darkness, the flame would be lost in glare, heat, collision. The universe works in much the same way. It gives its brightest creations room to exist without destroying one another. This is where our everyday instincts quietly fail us. Because on human scales, emptiness often means neglect. A deserted street suggests danger. A silent phone suggests rejection. But cosmic emptiness carries no such emotional weight. It is not abandonment, it is spacing. Stars are not lonely because they are far apart. They are stable because they are. Within our own galaxy, stars drift through enormous separations. Light travels for years just to bridge the nearest gap. And yet, from our vantage point, the night sky feels intimate, almost crowded. Constellations connect distant suns into familiar shapes, compressing unimaginable depth into a flat, comforting pattern. The sky tells us a story we can bear to look at, but the universe itself lives in the margins of that story. As we pull farther back, this pattern repeats with quiet insistence. Galaxies gather into clusters, clusters trace thin filaments, and between them stretch immense regions where almost nothing gathers at all. These cosmic voids are not rare interruptions, they are the dominant feature. Most of the universe's volume is claimed by places where matter scarcely whispers its presence. The luminous structures we celebrate are the exception, like frost outlining the edges of a vast, invisible window. And still, even here, emptiness does not mean inactivity. Space is not a frozen backdrop. It expands. It stretches. It carries faint energy, subtle pressure, a slow insistence that distance itself matters. What appears inert is quietly shaping the future, guiding how galaxies drift apart, deciding which regions will forever remain strangers. There is something almost meditative in this realization. The universe does not hurry to fill its silence. It allows things to separate, to settle, to find equilibrium over billions of years. Where everything is too close, violence dominates. Where there is room, patterns endure. Stars live longer. Orbits remain gentle. Complexity survives long enough to ask questions about its own origins. Even on the smallest scales we know, the story echoes. Matter itself is mostly spacing, held in form not by solidity, but by rules. Atoms are vast interiors of probability, their apparent firmness a negotiation between forces rather than a block of substance. What we touch feels solid only because emptiness is disciplined, because the universe enforces boundaries even where nothing seems to be. And so the idea of a universe packed full of material begins to feel less appealing. A cosmos with no breathing room would be loud, brief, and unstable. Everything would collide, merge, collapse. There would be no patience in such a place, no time for chemistry to refine itself into biology, no quiet stretches where evolution can experiment without being erased. In that light, emptiness appears not as a flaw, but as restraint practiced on a cosmic scale. From this perspective, distance becomes a form of care, a buffer against catastrophe, a pause between events, a silence that keeps the melody from becoming noise. The universe does not maximize presence. It balances it. It chooses where to gather matter sparingly and where to let space remain open, vast, and calm. There is a subtle invitation hidden in this design, one that does not announce itself as instruction. It simply demonstrates again and again that meaning does not require density. That importance does not scale with crowding. That longevity often depends on having room to unfold slowly without interference. When we look up and feel small beneath the stars, perhaps it is not because the universe is indifferent. Perhaps it is because it operates on a patience that dwarfs urgency. The night sky does not rush to impress. It waits. It allows light to travel unimaginable distances just to reach an eye that may or may not be watching. That quiet generosity is easy to miss, especially if we expect significance to arrive loudly. And so, as we continue deeper into this story, the question is no longer whether emptiness means nothing. It is whether we have learned how to read it. Because once we accept that the universe is not hollow but spacious, not vacant but deliberate, we are ready to follow the deeper thread, the slow contest between gravity and expansion, the shaping of islands of matter within an ocean of space, and the long, patient reason why the universe chose to become this way at all. Have you ever wondered why the universe can build a galaxy with 1 billion suns, yet still leave most of existence as a cathedral of quiet where even light can travel for years without meeting anything at all? Look closely at that silence, and you begin to notice it is not passive. It is contested. There is an invisible tug happening everywhere, a patient struggle written into the fabric of space itself. Gravity reaches inward like a careful hand, trying to gather dust into clouds, clouds into stars, stars into cities of light. But at the same time, space is not sitting still. It is stretching, as if the stage beneath the actors is slowly widening, making every embrace harder to hold. This is the part that feels almost poetic. The universe is both a builder and a distancer, a sculptor shaping structure, and a tide pulling the sculpture apart. John Archibald Wheeler captured the intimacy of this relationship with a line that reads like a spell. Space-time tells matter how to move. Matter tells space-time how to curve. In that single thought, you can feel the choreography. Matter trying to fall together, space deciding how steep the fall will be, and then space itself quietly changing the rules by expanding beneath it. If that sounds abstract, imagine a loaf of raisin bread rising in the oven. The raisins are galaxies, the dough is space. As the bread expands, raisins drift apart, not because they are pushing themselves away, but because the dough between them grows. Now give some raisins extra pull, a little stubborn gravity. They cling into small clusters, even while the whole loaf continues to swell. That is the cosmic compromise we live inside. Local islands of togetherness, set within an ocean that keeps widening. And here is where the emptiness earns its true meaning. It is not that the universe failed to make structure. It is that structure is a special victory, a rare, hard-won exception carved out of a general rule. We look at a bright spiral galaxy and think the universe is full, but that spiral is more like a lantern on a shoreline, surrounded by miles of open water. The glow convinces the eye. The distances tell the truth. Edwin Hubble, peering through a telescope that could not possibly know what it was about to reveal, helped humanity realize that the outside we feared was real. Galaxies were not islands inside our own. Wanden, they were islands beyond it, and many were rushing away. Long before dark energy became a household phrase for science communicators, Hubble's discovery carried a quiet emotional weight. If the universe is expanding, then separation is not merely an accident of geography, it is a feature of history. Yet gravity does not surrender easily. It is the universe's way of remembering itself. A gas cloud collapses, heat rises, a star ignites. A newborn sun is gravity's signature, ink pressed into space. And when stars gather by the hundreds of billions, swirling around a common center, gravity turns from a gentle suggestion into a binding vow. Even in an expanding universe, there are places where that vow holds. Our Milky Way and Andromeda are not drifting into forever in the same way distant galaxies are. They are locked in a long, inevitable dance toward collision, a reminder that expansion is powerful, but not absolute in every neighborhood. To picture that, think of a calm lake with a slow current. Drop a few leaves in the middle, and they drift apart with the flow, but near a whirlpool, the story changes. The current still exists, the widening still happens, yet the whirlpool gathers. It pulls, it organizes, it creates a local rule inside a larger rule. Galaxy clusters are whirlpools on the grandest scale. They hold thousands of galaxies like fireflies caught in a single breath, while the wider universe keeps stretching its arms. If you stay with this image long enough, you start to feel why emptiness grows. Gravity can only work as fast as matter can communicate its pull across space, and expansion quietly increases those separations. The farther matter is from matter, the harder it is to call each other home. Over time, the universe becomes a place where the crowded regions grow denser, and the empty regions grow emptier, as if reality is sorting itself into bright knots and dark corridors. This is why cosmic structure can look like a web. Filaments of galaxies tracing lines like silver threads, with vast voids between them like slow, deep breaths. Those voids are not blank mistakes. They are the footprints left by a universe that expanded while it was learning to clump. And once you see the web, it becomes difficult to unsee the deeper implication. The emptiness is not the absence of a plan. It is the outcome of two great tendencies negotiating with time. Einstein once wrote a line that still lands like a small shock of wonder. The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. Does nations of the sames of the 75 that? In the context of gravity and expansion, that wonder becomes almost tender. We are trying to understand a cosmos that both gathers and lets go, and the fact that it follows patterns at all feels like a gift. Another Einstein thought, often repeated because it refuses to lose its relevance. God does not play dice with the universe. Betändet haven solve goda död. Whether you take it literally or as metaphor, you can feel the longing behind it. A desire to believe the universe is not random noise, but a story with rules that can be learned. And still, the universe keeps a little of its mystery intact. Even the rules can be emotionally strange. Expansion is not an explosion into empty space. It is space itself changing its scale. That subtlety matters, because it changes the way you feel the cosmos. It is not debris flying outward from a center. It is a tapestry quietly being stretched, thread by thread, without tearing, without sound. Once you hold that image, You begin to sense why the night sky can feel both intimate and unreachable. The stars feel close because they shine, but they are separated by an architecture designed for distance. J. B. S. Haldane offered a sentence that fits here like a closing door that somehow opens another room. Not only is the universe stranger than we imagine, it is stranger than we can imagine. Okay, when not a man's of the band. Gravity and expansion embody that strangeness. One makes castles, the other makes deserts, and together they produce a cosmos where life can exist on a small rock that circles a modest star, inside a galaxy that is only a single spark in a vast dark field. The longer I sit with this tug of war, the more it feels like a quiet lesson hidden in plain sight. Not the kind you announce, but the kind you absorb the way you absorb starlight, slowly, almost without noticing, because the universe does not simply choose one force over the other. It allows both to speak, and reality becomes the conversation. Gravity teaches closeness, how beauty can form when things commit to each other. Expansion teaches space, how separation can create stability, how too much crowding can become catastrophe. Somewhere between those truths, the cosmos finds balance, and that balance looks, from our human perspective, like emptiness. So when you hear that the universe is mostly void, try not to hear it as a bleak verdict. Hear it as the stage that makes the music possible. The silence between notes is not the enemy of the melody. It is what lets the melody exist. And in the next part, we will rewind to the earlier universe, to a time when that silence had not yet opened its wings, when everything was closer, hotter, louder, and the first seeds of structure were just beginning to rise out of the glow. Have you ever wondered why the universe feels like a grand palace with almost no guests? Why the brightest galaxies are separated by gulfs so wide they seem like pauses in a sentence that never ends? If emptiness is the dominant feature of reality, then what was the universe like before it learned how to be empty? To answer that, we have to rewind into a time when space was not quiet, when the cosmos did not yet know the meaning of distance, when everything that would someday become stars, planets, oceans, and your own breath was pressed together in an intimacy so fierce it would feel, to our modern instincts, almost impossible. The early universe was not a stage sprinkled with actors. It was the entire theater, the audience, the heat of the lights, and the roar of the crowd all packed into the same breathless moment. Steven Weinberg once described the beginning with an image that still lands like thunder, an explosion which occurred simultaneously everywhere. And in that single phrase, you can feel the strange truth we keep failing to picture. Not a blast from a point into empty surroundings, but space itself arriving already full, already hot, already crowded. Try to imagine it with something human-sized. Picture a city at rush hour, except every street is a river of light. Every building is a furnace, and there is no air between people, no personal space, no silence. Now shrink that city until it fits inside a droplet. Shrink again until the droplet becomes a grain. Shrink again until the grain becomes a whisper of volume. And still, in that early chapter, the universe is not mostly nothing. It is mostly energy in motion, a bright pressure that refuses to sit still. This is the part many people miss. Emptiness is not the original condition. Emptiness is the consequence. The universe begins as a kind of crowded poem written in fire. Then, line by line, it stretches the paper. The same content, spread across a growing page. So the first reason the universe becomes empty is almost tender in its simplicity. Space grows, and growth, by its nature, makes room. If you want a clean mental picture, use perfume in a room. Spray a single burst in a small closet, and the scent feels intense, unavoidable, thick. Now imagine the closet walls sliding outward. The room swelling into a hall, then into a stadium, then into something city-sized. No new perfume is added, but the air becomes more generous. The scent thins. That thinning is the feeling we call cosmic emptiness. And yet, there is a second reason, more dramatic. While space was learning to expand, matter was learning to gather. The universe was not perfectly smooth at birth. It had tiny wrinkles, faint unevenness, like the slightest texture on a fresh sheet. Those tiny differences mattered, because gravity is a patient sculptor with a single obsession. Where there is a little more, it pulls more toward itself. Where there is a little less, it leaves it behind. Over time, the rich got richer, and the poor got poorer. Not in a moral sense, but in a physical, inevitable one. This is why structure and emptiness are twins. To build a galaxy, the universe must also build the opposite of a galaxy. A region that gets drained, a cosmic valley left behind when matter rolls downhill into brighter places. If you have ever watched rain-carved channels in soil, you already understand the universe more than you think. Water collects into streams and rivers, and in doing so, it leaves ridges and dry pockets. The rivers are spectacular, but the quiet spaces between them are the price and the proof of the flow. So when we say the universe is empty, we are not describing a mistake. We are describing a signature. The mark left by expansion, writing distance into everything, and gravity underlining certain words until they become stars. Between the underlined words, the page remains wide and pale. Now comes the part that feels almost like a betrayal. Even inside what we call crowded, the emptiness still dominates. Take the solar system. If the sun were the size of a grapefruit, Earth would be a peppercorn far away, and the next star would be another grapefruit separated by continents of nothing. Space is not merely the background. It is the main character that refuses to step off stage. And just when you think you have it, the universe adds a final twist, like a soft voice lowering at the end of a story. The expansion is not only continuing, it is accelerating. Whatever is pushing that acceleration, many call it dark energy. And whether you picture it as a pressure, a property of space, or an unanswered question wearing a calm mask, its effect in the narrative is clear. The universe keeps making more room faster than matter can reclaim it. The empty regions do not simply persist. They become more final, more distant, more insulated from rescue. If that sounds bleak, the universe has a gentler interpretation waiting in the same facts. Emptiness is not just what separates, it is what protects. A universe packed too tightly would be a universe that burns through its stories too fast. Stars would collide more often, radiation would be harsher, gravitational chaos would have fewer quiet corners. Emptiness is the slow breath between heartbeats. It is the distance that allows stability, the pause that lets complexity form without being crushed. Stephen Hawking offered a reminder that feels like a compass for moments like this. Look up at the stars. It is a simple instruction, but it carries an unspoken second half. When you look up, you also look into the spaces between. And those spaces are not a void in the emotional sense. They are the reason the stars can be stars, rather than a single blazing, short-lived smear. So I like to think of the early universe as a child holding everything too tightly, a fist clenched around possibility, and time, patient and wise, teaching that child to open its hand, not to lose what it holds, but to let it breathe, to let it arrange itself into patterns. First comes the heat and the crowding, then comes the stretching, then comes the gathering into islands of light, and finally, the wide, dark sea appears, not as an enemy, but as the space where the islands can exist without drowning each other. If you stay with me into the next part, we will follow that opening hand more closely. We will walk back through the moments when the universe cooled just enough for the first simple building blocks to survive. And you will see how the road from packed with everything to mostly empty is not a mystery of loss. It is a story of growth, of structure, and of a silence that had to be born before anything could truly last. Have you ever wondered why the universe had to learn the art of gathering itself? Why it did not simply stay smooth and evenly filled forever? And why, the moment matter began to cling together, the first true emptiness was born. In the beginning, the cosmos was not a gallery of galaxies with black velvet between them. It was closer to a fog of fire, a near uniform glow, a young ocean with barely any ripples. And yet those ripples mattered more than any later masterpiece. Because a perfectly uniform universe is a universe with no preferred direction, no reason for anything to fall toward anything else. No here that is heavier than there. No invitation for gravity to begin its slow, patient work. Cosmology often sounds like cold mathematics, but at its heart it is a story about how tiny imbalances become destinies, how a whisper becomes a choir, how the universe takes a coin-thin difference and spends it across billions of years until it buys a galaxy. Think of a loaf of raisin bread rising in an oven. At first, the dough looks almost the same everywhere, but as it expands, the raisins begin to mark where the stuff is. Not because the bread planned it, but because the simplest rules, repeated long enough, produce pattern. Or imagine a calm lake at night, glassy and perfect. Drop a single grain of sand, and you do not get a tsunami, you get rings. And if you wait, and keep waiting, those rings become the only history the surface remembers. In the early universe, the grain of sand was not one event but countless tiny fluctuations, the faintest unevenness in density and temperature, places where matter was ever so slightly more crowded than its neighbors. And in a universe where gravity never stops listening, slightly more is already a command. Gravity does not need drama to begin. It only needs an excuse. A region with a little extra mass becomes a little deeper, like a shallow dimple in a stretched sheet, and nearby matter, wandering without intention, begins to drift inward, one particle at a time, then many, then streams, then a slow river of gas. And the miracle is not that it happens quickly, but that it happens at all, persistently, without fatigue. This is where the phrase, "when matter learned to clump," feels almost literal. As if the universe were practicing a new kind of memory, learning how to keep what it has, how to turn motion into architecture, how to take randomness and let it settle into shape. Albert Einstein, frustrated by the idea of pure chance at the foundations of reality, famously insisted, "God does not play dice with the universe." IGBS. And regardless of how you read that line, it captures a deep intuition that the cosmos is not merely noise. Because structure formation is the universe behaving like a patient composer, taking a faint motif and repeating it until the room is filled with music. But here is the twist that makes this subject feel almost poetic. The same process that builds luminous islands also sculpts the oceans of nothing between them. Because every time gravity gathers matter into a denser place, it steals that matter from somewhere else. And the places left behind do not merely stay empty, they become emptier over time. A simple image helps. Picture wind blowing snow across a field. Wherever a drift forms, it grows, not because snow appears from nowhere, but because the wind robs nearby ground to feed the mound. The mound rises. The surrounding patches become bare. And soon the landscape is defined as much by absence as by accumulation. Or think of traffic on a highway. One small tap of the brakes is enough to create a jam that thickens behind it. Cars bunch up, and in front of the jam, a strange emptiness opens, a stretch of road with almost no cars at all. Nothing supernatural happened. The same cars simply reorganized themselves into crowd and gap. Galaxies and clusters are the traffic jams of matter. Cosmic voids are the quiet highway ahead. This is why the empty regions are not an afterthought. They are the shadow cast by structure. They are the negative space that proves the sculpture exists. And it gets more haunting when you scale up. Because the universe does not only form stars and galaxies, it forms a cosmic web, thin filaments where matter flows and collects, knots where clusters grow heavy, and vast bubbles between them where matter becomes scarce, then rarer, then almost unimaginable. These voids are not perfectly empty. The universe rarely grants absolutes. There may be thin gas, stray galaxies, dark matter passing like a silent tide. But compared to the crowded filaments, a void is a cathedral of quiet. And the more the universe evolves, the more pronounced that contrast becomes. At this point, it is worth letting the human mind breathe inside the scale of it, because our instincts are built for forests and streets, for rooms that feel full or empty by furniture and air. Cosmic emptiness is a different species of emptiness, so large it becomes a kind of presence. A presence that shapes everything by letting it move, by giving gravity time, by giving light room to travel. Stephen Hawking once offered a line that feels like a gentle instruction for moments like this. Remember to look up at the stars and not down at your feet. And if you do look up with this story in mind, the night sky changes its meaning. You stop seeing stars as scattered decorations. You start seeing them as survivors of a long cosmic sorting process, little beacons marking where matter won the right to stay together. Carl Sagan, speaking with the tenderness of someone who never separated science from wonder, reminded us, "We're made of star stuff. Be force." And that sentence lands differently here, because the star stuff in your body is not only forged in ancient stellar furnaces, it is also the outcome of gravity's preference for gathering. You are here because the universe learned how to clump, because gas clouds could become dense enough to ignite, because those fires could live long enough to cook heavy elements, because explosions could scatter them, because new systems could inherit them, because planets could hold on to them, because chemistry could take its time. Even the emptiness becomes part of the tenderness of the story. Without vast spaces, stars would be jostled, disrupted, starved of stable neighborhoods. Without quiet gulfs, the galaxy might be a constant storm, and the long, slow arc from fluctuation to life would have fewer chances to complete itself. So when we say almost casually that the universe has regions left behind, Dansha, so reading of the first, it is not a moral failure, not a cosmic neglect. It is the unavoidable accounting of matter moving toward gravity's invitations. Some places become the banquet. Some places become the empty hall afterwards. And both are written by the same hand. There is a meditative lesson hidden in that physics, if you let it sit with you. Growth is not only about adding. Sometimes growth is the act of concentrating, of choosing, of committing resources to a few places so that something complex can happen there. And the cost is spaciousness elsewhere. Silence, room, a kind of sacred pause. If you ever feel unsettled by the thought of cosmic voids, you are not alone. They can feel like the universe is mostly absence. But another way to see it is that the universe is mostly possibility, mostly breathing room, mostly the quiet that allows the bright things to be bright. And when you follow this thread far enough, the emptiness starts to feel less like a cold verdict and more like an elegant consequence. Matter gathered because it could, and where it gathered, it made light, and where it did not, it made space. And together, light and space became the canvas we call a cosmos, which raises the question that still prickles with mystery even after all this understanding. If the same gentle rules can turn tiny ripples into galaxies, what else might they be building right now, slowly, beyond our immediate notice? In the places that look quiet, in the regions that seem forgotten, in the soft, expanding dark, where the universe keeps its patience. What if the true main character of the cosmos is not the galaxy, not the star, not even the blazing quasar, but the vast, patient nothing in between. The places where almost no light is born, yet almost all of space quietly lives. When we first learn astronomy, we fall in love with the bright parts. Spiral arms like brushstrokes, nebulae like stained glass, clusters like jeweled cities scattered across night. But the universe has a different sense of drama. It builds its grandest architecture out of absence. Galaxies do not sprinkle evenly like salt. They gather into thin walls and long filaments, as if the cosmos stretched a lace curtain across a black window, and between those threads lie enormous voids, bubbles of near emptiness so wide that even a beam of light could travel for hundreds of millions of years and still feel alone. This is where the story becomes strangely intimate, because empty does not mean meaningless. A cosmic void is not a hole torn in reality. It is a region where matter simply did not collect in the same way, where gravity's long patience had less to work with. If you could float there, you would not see a dramatic boundary drawn in glowing ink. You would feel it instead, like stepping from a crowded street into a silent desert at midnight. The air does not change color, yet your mind instantly knows the difference. Carl Sagan once reminded us, somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known. 5 list in. And the incredible thing here is that the universe's largest structures are not the bright ones we can point to, but the dim, spacious ones that swallow most of the volume. We like to tell ourselves the universe is a collection of objects. In truth, it is a choreography of distances. The cosmos is not a jar filled with marbles. It is an ocean where the islands are rare, and the water is almost everything. To make this easier to imagine, try a simple comparison. Picture a city at night seen from an airplane. You notice the glowing neighborhoods and the bright highways, and your eyes instinctively connect them into a pattern. But what takes up most of the map is darkness, parks, fields, rivers, open land. Now expand that idea until the dark regions become so immense that entire chains of cities cling only to their edges. That is closer to what cosmic voids do to galaxies. The luminous parts feel like the whole story because they shout. The voids feel invisible because they whisper, yet the whisper covers almost everything. Or imagine a soap bubble sculpture. Many bubbles pressed together. The walls are thin, shimmering membranes, and the interiors are mostly empty air. Galaxies are like the shimmering walls. They outline the bubbles. They trace the borders. They make the pattern visible. But the bubble's interior, the part you barely notice, is the bulk of the volume. The void is the air of the cosmic foam, not spectacular to look at, yet essential to the shape of the whole. This is why saying voids are the main character is not poetic exaggeration. It is a shift in perspective that makes the universe suddenly more honest. If you only study the bright knots of galaxies, you might think the cosmos is a crowded museum, but when you include the voids, you realize it is more like a cathedral of silence, where the emptiness is not leftover space, it is the design. And that design carries information. The size and distribution of voids tell us how structure grew over time, how tiny early ripples became the vast web we see now, and how the universe chose, again and again, to leave most of itself unfilled. Here, the mind naturally asks a deeper question. Why would a universe that began so dense end up so hollow? Part of the answer is hidden in the most gentle fact of all. Space expands. Not like an explosion throwing things outward into a pre-existing room, but like the room itself slowly stretching, so every distance becomes a little more distance. Gravity tries to gather matter into islands. Expansion keeps widening the sea. Over billions of years, the islands grow, but the sea grows faster. And then comes the quiet accelerator in the background. Dark energy, the reason expansion appears to speed up rather than slow down. If that idea feels abstract, hold it like this. Imagine you are trying to meet a friend across a moving walkway. At first, you can walk fast enough to reach them, but if the walkway begins to speed up, there comes a point where you can still walk, still try, still move forward, yet the distance keeps increasing anyway. Voids are like regions where the moving walkway wins. They become emptier not because matter is actively removed, but because the universe keeps giving emptiness more room to be itself. There is a line often attributed to Albert Einstein. The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. Don't five the tale, and cosmic voids are one of the clearest examples of that strange gift. Nothing about them is designed for our comfort, yet they reveal a pattern we can model, test, and map. Even the emptiest places have fingerprints. They carry the memory of how matter flowed, where it hesitated, where it gathered, where it did not. If you want a more visceral example, look at the scale of the solar system. We often imagine planets as neighbors in a neighborhood, but they are beads on a thread, separated by enormous stretches of nothing. Now zoom out to the distance between stars. Your nearest stellar neighbor is so far away that, on a scale where the sun is a grain of sand, it would still be separated by miles of empty beach. Then zoom out again to the distance between galaxies, and then again to the distances between the filaments of the cosmic web. At each step, the lesson repeats with a softer and deeper insistence. What looks like stuff is rare. What looks like nothing is the rule. This is where the narrative turns almost meditative, because the voids change how we feel about significance. We are used to worshiping what is bright, loud, and concentrated. We assume importance must be dense, that meaning must gather like a crowd. But the universe suggests another kind of importance, the kind that comes from space to breathe, from silence that allows music to exist, from distance that makes relationships real. Even in human life, closeness is precious, partly because separation exists. Without the in-between, there is no meeting, no longing, no return. Stephen Hawking once said, "Look up at the stars and not down at your feet." By Thinkersames of the Nassas. And if we truly look up, we eventually notice that the stars are not the whole sky. The sky is mostly the space that holds them apart. Cosmic voids invite us to respect that holding. They are not a mistake in the universe's construction. They are the canvas that lets the paint mean something. And if you let that idea sink in, a personal perspective naturally emerges. Not as a moral lesson announced from a podium, but as a quiet recognition that can follow you off the screen and into your day. The universe seems to say that emptiness is not always loss. Sometimes it is possibility. Sometimes it is what makes structure stable, what gives complexity time, what lets fragile systems avoid constant collision and collapse. A universe filled to the brim would be violent, noisy, short-lived. A universe with room can grow stories. So, when you hear that galaxies sit on thin walls, around giant bubbles of emptiness, do not imagine a bleak cosmos. Imagine a cosmos practicing restraint. Imagine it choosing, over and over, to keep most of itself open, as if it understood that creation needs space and that wonder needs silence. Now let me bring you back to the hook that started this. If the voids are truly the main character, what does that make the bright galaxies supporting actors, or glowing subtitles written along the edges of something far bigger? Tell me in the comments what you feel when you realize most of reality is quiet. Does it make the universe seem lonely, or does it make it feel gentle, like a vast temple built to protect delicate fires of light? And if you want to see how this cosmic foam formed in the first place, how a young, crowded universe learned to sculpt emptiness into enormous bubbles, and why those bubbles keep expanding like slow exhalations, then stay with me, because the next step is to return to the early universe, when everything was close enough to touch, and the first seeds of the voids were barely a whisper in the newborn light. And from that whisper, the universe began learning how to become silent. Have you ever wondered why the universe seems to be building cathedrals of galaxies, only to surround them with an ocean of nothing that keeps widening forever? That question is where dark energy steps out of the shadows, not as a villain with a face, but as a quiet rule written into space itself. At first, emptiness sounds like an accident, like the universe simply forgot to finish painting the canvas. But look closer, and emptiness begins to feel deliberate, almost tender, because every time matter gathers into a galaxy, it also leaves behind a widening hush, a stretched silence where gravity's reach grows faint. And then, as if the universe is exhaling more deeply with age, expansion accelerates. The gaps don't just remain gaps, they become borders. This is the strange poetry of dark energy. It makes the faraway not merely distant, but increasingly unreachable. Two galaxies can still glow in the same night sky, like lanterns on opposite shores, yet the water between them is rising. Not rushing like a flood you can hear, but rising so steadily that one day you look up and realize the shoreline is gone. Only horizon. In the language of physics, we describe it with a kind of negative pressure, a push woven into the fabric of space. In the language of the heart, it feels like a patient separation, a slow, respectful loosening of ties. And what makes it unsettling is not just the idea that space expands. It is the idea that expansion speeds up. It's as if the universe learned a secret, that it can keep distances growing without running out of breath. Long before the phrase dark energy became common, the universe hinted at this possibility through a much older tension, the cosmological constant. There's a famous line passed down like a whispered confession, attributed to Einstein through those who knew him. I heard Einstein say to Gamow about the cosmological constant. That was my biggest blunder of my life, John Archibald Wheeler recalled. Even if you treat that quote like a legend with fingerprints, it captures something real. The eerie feeling that a small extra term in an equation can decide the fate of everything. Then, near the end of the 20th century, the sky delivered its shock. Supernovae, used as cosmic mile markers, looked dimmer than expected, not because they were tired, but because the space between us and them had stretched in a way that implied acceleration. The universe wasn't slowing down, it was pulling away faster. Adam Rees, reflecting on that evidence, described the logic with calm precision. If instead dark energy had begun increasing the size of the universe only recently, then the more distant supernovae should bear witness of the universe at an earlier stage. In a word, Fiverr. That sentence is almost gentle, but what it implies is radical. It suggests the universe has phases of behavior, and in our era, the phase is separation. Here is where emptiness becomes permanent, not as a dramatic proclamation, but as a consequence of compounding distance. Because once a region becomes relatively empty, gravity has less material to work with there. Less matter means weaker pull. Weaker pull means less chance of gathering more matter back. And while gravity is trying to sew the cosmos into thicker threads, dark energy keeps stretching the cloth, so the thin places become thinner. That is why voids are not just holes. They are environments. They are neighborhoods where the universe has decided to stop building and start expanding. To picture it without equations, imagine a city at night seen from a plane. Clusters of lights gather where people live, and between them are dark fields. Now imagine the fields steadily growing, not because the lights are turning off, but because the ground itself is being pulled outward, inch by inch, year by year. The lit neighborhoods remain. They may even grow brighter as more houses are built. Yet the distance between neighborhoods grows faster than any road can be laid. Eventually, every neighborhood becomes its own island of light, and the darkness between them becomes a sea that no bridge can cross. Or think of a dandelion turning to seed. Each seed is a galaxy, each filament a line of space. You blow softly, and the seeds drift apart. Then the air itself begins to push harder. You didn't add more seeds. you change the rule of separation. Once the seeds have drifted far enough, they stop influencing each other in any meaningful way. Not because they vanish, but because the space between them grows too quickly for their gentle pulls to matter. This is the haunting part. Dark energy doesn't need to destroy anything to win. It only needs to keep expanding space faster than structures can reclaim it. A void doesn't have to be emptied like a room being cleared out. It becomes empty, the way a song becomes distant when the singer walks away while the wind rises. You can still hear the melody for a while, then the notes thin. Then one day the silence isn't a pause anymore. It is the new condition. And yet, calling it tireless isolation is only half the story, because there's another way to feel it, and it's almost comforting. If everything were packed tight, if matter filled space evenly and densely, the universe would be restless. Collisions would be constant, stability rare, long-lived orbits fragile. Emptiness is what gives systems room to breathe. It is what allows galaxies to spin for billions of years without being immediately swallowed by their neighbors. It is what lets a star like ours hold its planets in a quiet dance rather than a crowded shove. There's a line often attributed to Neil deGrasse Tyson that captures our humility in one clean strike. In terms of the most astonishing fact about which we know nothing, there is dark matter and dark energy. We don't know what either of them is. That example. Whether you agree with the phrasing or not, the point lands. We are living inside a universe whose dominant ingredients are still named like placeholders. Dark doesn't mean evil. It means unseen, unpinned, not yet understood. So yes, dark energy can feel like the force that makes everything worse. Because it promises a future where distant galaxies slip beyond visibility, where the night sky gradually loses its crowded depth. But it can also feel, strangely, like the force that makes everything perfect, because it preserves the islands of structure that exist by giving them spaciousness, longevity, quiet. It turns the universe into a monastery of distance, and in that distance, complexity has time. When I sit with this idea, I notice how easily the word empty becomes an emotional judgment, as if emptiness must be tragic. But in the cosmos, emptiness is often a kind of permission for light to travel, for planets to keep their paths, for stories to unfold slowly enough to be remembered. The lesson hides in the physics without needing to announce itself. Not everything that separates is an enemy. Sometimes separation is what allows a delicate thing to survive. And still, the question remains like a bright thread pulled through darkness. If the universe is accelerating apart, what does it mean for our place in it? Are we watching the beginning of an eternal loneliness, or the continuation of a grand design where silence is the stage and matter is the dancer? Hold that thought, because the next step is where the mystery sharpens. We need to look at how cosmic voids actually form, how they grow, and why their boundaries look like vast walls of galaxies, as if emptiness itself were sculpting the universe with invisible hands. Have you ever wondered why the universe feels so vast and so empty, and why that emptiness might be the very reason anything beautiful can last? When we imagine a fertile cosmos, we picture a sky packed tight with stars, a glittering crowd with no gaps, a cathedral of light where nothing is wasted. But nature does not build endurance out of crowds. It builds it out of space. The universe is not a city. It is a quiet ocean. And in that ocean, the calm water matters as much as the islands. Emptiness is not the absence of meaning. It is the breathing room that lets meaning become stable. There is a line often attributed to Albert Einstein. The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. Final fermented. That single sentence hides a gentle mystery. Comprehensibility needs regularity. Regularity needs stability. And stability needs distance. If everything were piled together like wet sand, gravity would pull too hard and too fast. Stars would collide more often, orbits would shatter, and the universe would burn through its chances like a match flaring once and dying. Think of a campfire. Too many logs shoved together choke the flame. Too few, and it cannot catch. A long-lasting fire needs air between the wood, tiny corridors where oxygen can slip in quietly. In the same way, a long-lasting universe needs the spacious corridors of darkness. So matter can gather slowly. So heat can spread out. So time can do its patient work. Crowding creates drama. Space creates duration. This is why the idea feels so strange at first, because we often treat emptiness like a failure. We call it waste. We call it nothing. We call it the part we can ignore. But in cosmic terms, emptiness is an engineer. It designs separation, and separation prevents catastrophe. It gives gravity room to sculpt rather than crush. It gives motion room to settle into rhythm rather than collapse into chaos. Look at our own neighborhood for an example you can almost feel. The sun is enormous, yet the planets are not stacked beside it like coins in a jar. They are spaced out like notes in a slow melody. Mercury whispering close in, Neptune humming far away. That spacing is not aesthetic. It is survival. If Earth orbited just a little too close to Venus, their gravitational nudges could slowly destabilize both paths, like two dancers stepping on each other's toes until the dance becomes a fall. Instead, the solar system is arranged with enough room for the music to continue. Now zoom out to the stars. The nearest star system is so far away that a beam of light needs years to cross the gap. That distance is not an inconvenience. It is a protective silence. If stars were packed as tightly as streetlights, their gravity would tug at each other constantly. Their planets would be yanked from stable paths. Comets and asteroids would be flung like sparks in a storm. And life would be trying to form on a floor that never stops shaking. A crowded universe would be a universe of frequent resets, a place where complexity keeps being erased before it can learn to stand. Even inside a galaxy, where images make it look like a thick fog of suns, most of the volume is still emptiness. That emptiness is what allows a galaxy to be graceful rather than violent. It allows spiral arms to persist. It allows star formation to happen in pockets rather than everywhere at once. It prevents the whole system from turning into one continuous collision. Space is the difference between a symphony and noise. There is another voice that always returns when we talk about the vastness between things. Carl Sagan once said, "Somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known." In Clothing Outus, I hear a deeper implication in it. The incredible thing often needs time to become knowable, and time needs stability, and stability needs emptiness. Without long, quiet intervals, there is no slow chemistry, no patient assembly of heavier elements inside stars, no gentle cooling of planets, no oceans finding their shorelines, no ecosystems discovering balance. Emptiness is the space where the universe takes its breath, and breath is what turns force into rhythm. You can picture this with a simple human scale comparison. Imagine a library where every book is slammed into one heap, pages tearing, covers bending, spines snapping. Information exists there, but it cannot be read. It cannot be preserved. It cannot be passed along. Now imagine the same books spaced on shelves, air between them, order that allows retrieval, time that allows learning. A universe that is too dense is like the heap. A universe with emptiness is like the shelves. The emptiness does not erase the books. It makes them usable. And there is a quieter truth that sneaks up on you once you accept this. Emptiness is not only a condition for order, it becomes a condition for kindness in physics. In a sparse universe, catastrophes are rarer. A planet can circle its star for billions of years. A star can burn steadily rather than being disturbed. A fragile chemical experiment can run long enough to become biology. The universe does not need to be gentle everywhere. It only needs a few stable islands. And emptiness is the sea that keeps those islands from smashing into each other. Some people hear this and feel small. I feel strangely comforted, because it suggests that endurance is not won by domination. It is won by spacing, by restraint, by leaving room. Nature is telling us something without preaching. The cosmos becomes livable not by filling every gap, but by respecting the gaps. Even gravity, the great collector, does its finest work when it is not rushed. If you want one more image to hold in your mind, picture a garden. Plant seeds too close, and the roots tangle. The stems compete. The leaves block the sun. Everything grows fast and weak, and then collapses. Plant with space and the garden becomes a system. Each life has room to unfold. Each form finds its shape. The universe is that garden on the largest scale. And the dark between galaxies is not barren soil. It is spacing. It is design. And so, the next time you look up and feel that the sky is mostly nothing, try letting that nothingness speak, not as a void of despair, but as the quiet architecture of persistence. Because the most surprising twist is this: the universe did not create order in spite of emptiness. It created order through emptiness, like a composer using silence to make music intelligible. If this idea changes the way you feel about the night sky, tell me in the comments. Do you see cosmic emptiness as loneliness, or as mercy? Do you think life is rare because the universe is empty, or possible because it is? And as we keep going, we are going to drift back to the early universe, to a time when space was not yet wide enough to feel silent, so we can watch how expansion slowly taught the cosmos to leave room, and how that room became the cradle of everything that came after. What if the reason the universe feels like it is speeding away from us is not hidden in the distant past, but in the quiet neighborhood we call home? What if we are measuring the cosmos from inside a slightly emptier pocket of space than most places get to inhabit? And what if that subtle loneliness is bending our conclusions, not with deception, but with perspective? Imagine standing on a calm shoreline at night, watching lanterns drift across a black sea. The lanterns are real, their glow is real, but the darkness between them is the true ocean. Now imagine trying to judge the size of the sea only by how quickly the lanterns seem to separate in your field of view. If you happen to be standing in a bay where the lanterns are already more spread out than average, your guess about the whole ocean may tilt ever so slightly. That is the unsettling elegance of the local void idea. The possibility that our region of the universe is a touch more rarefied than the cosmic average, like living in a gentle dip in the density landscape, not a dramatic hole that swallows galaxies, but a long, wide hush where matter is just a bit less common and distances feel just a bit more exaggerated. And when we turn our best instruments toward the sky and ask, how fast is the universe expanding? We may be hearing an answer colored by the acoustics of this hush. The emotional sting here is not that science might be wrong. It is that the universe might be honest in a way that still misleads the hurried listener. Because measurements are not made from nowhere. They are made from here, from a specific address written in starlight. Carl Sagan once offered a line that feels like a compass in this kind of vertigo. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself. By the watches, it's a manly every two, and there is a quiet warning inside that poetry, because the cosmos knows itself through the limitations of its own viewpoint, through eyes placed in particular corners. To picture how a slightly emptier region could matter, think of a city at night seen from a plane. Downtown is bright and dense, suburbs fade outward, and beyond them, the dark fields begin. If you live out in those fields, and you estimate how crowded the country is by counting porch lights in every direction, you will still be counting real homes, Yet your lived experience will whisper, sparse, even if the national average is higher. In cosmology, galaxies are those porch lights, and the spaces between them are not just gaps. They are the dominant substance of the view. A modest underdensity can make nearby galaxies stream outward a bit faster relative to you, like foam sliding away from a slowly inflating bubble. This is where the story touches a famous stubborn puzzle that haunts modern cosmology. We measure the expansion rate nearby using stellar candles and galactic distances, and we infer it from the early universe using the fossil light of the cosmic microwave background, and the numbers do not perfectly agree. That mismatch has become a pressure point where new physics might enter, or where old assumptions might finally reveal their hairline cracks. A local void is one of the most human explanations, because it asks us to consider that we might be standing in an unremarkable but statistically meaningful patch of cosmos, the way a person can live through an unusually rainy season and start believing the climate has changed. But notice how delicately this idea must be handled. Too large a void and it would leave fingerprints everywhere, in galaxy counts, in gravitational lensing, in the way light threads through cosmic structure. Too small a void and it cannot move the needle enough to matter. So the idea lives in that narrow corridor where nature often hides, not in the dramatic extremes, but in subtle gradients spread across hundreds of millions of light years, where intuition fails and only careful mapping can speak. Here the universe becomes almost personal, almost shy. It is as if it has draped a thin veil over the truth and invited us to learn humility as a method. Stephen Hawking once said, "My goal is simple. It is a complete understanding of the universe." Thanks for watching. Yet the more we chase that completeness, the more we discover that understanding is not only about bigger telescopes, it is about better questions and better patience with uncertainty. And if we are indeed in a slightly emptier region, then the lesson is not that reality is tricking us. It is that reality is teaching us what it means to measure anything at all. Let me give you a more intimate image. Picture a vast concert hall where a single cello note is played and allowed to fade. If you sit near a soft curtain, the note will die sooner than if you sit beside a stone wall. Both listeners hear the same instrument, the same frequency, the same truth, but the room shapes the decay, shapes the perception. In cosmology, the room is the large-scale structure around us, and the note is the recession of galaxies, the way space stretches and carries them away. A slightly emptier environment is like a softer curtain, making the local expansion feel a little more eager, a little more pronounced. And yet, the most persuasive part of this idea is also its greatest danger. It feels plausible because it is ordinary, because the universe is not smooth like a perfect marble. It is textured like breath on cold glass, with threads and gaps and vast caverns of near nothing. We already know cosmic voids exist, enormous regions where galaxies are scarce and matter is thinly sprinkled. The question is not whether voids are real, but whether our particular address is special enough to matter and ordinary enough to be overlooked. That is the knife edge, and it cuts through comfort. At this point, a careful voice must join the story, the kind that does not romance uncertainty but respects it. Richard Feynman offered one of the most bracing principles in all of science. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. There's if we want a local void to be the answer, we will start seeing it everywhere, like faces in clouds. If we fear it, we will dismiss it too quickly, like a whisper we do not want to hear. So the discipline is to let the data be the narrator, and let our imagination serve, not rule. Still, even while we keep our hands steady, the philosophical weight remains, and it is beautiful, because the local void idea, whether it holds up or not, reminds us that cosmic truths are not shouted from a single mountaintop. They are assembled from many angles, many methods, many distances, stitched together like a quilt that only becomes a picture when you step back far enough. One measurement alone can be faithful and still incomplete, like describing an entire forest by the scent of one pine. If you want to feel this in your bones, try this simple thought. Imagine you are floating in a dark pool with a gentle current, and you release a ring of glowing petals. From inside the ring, the petals seem to drift away in every direction. You might conclude the water is expanding, but what you are really seeing is a current pattern around your body. Now scale that metaphor up until the pool is billions of light years wide, and the petals are galaxies, and the current is the slow gravitational breathing of structure. The universe does expand, yes, but our local currents may add a small, meaningful accent to the sentence we are trying to read. And this is where the story becomes quietly meditative, because it returns us to a gentle human truth. We learn the universe the same way we learn ourselves, by triangulating from limited viewpoints, correcting, refining, listening again. The possibility that we live in a slightly emptier region is a reminder that certainty is not a starting point. It is an earned calm, achieved after many cycles of doubt. And if there is a lesson braided into this, it is that humility is not the opposite of confidence. It is the foundation of reliable wonder. So when you look up tonight, and the sky feels like an ocean of nothing with a few jeweled islands of light, remember that emptiness is not merely absence. It is context. It is stage. It is breathing room for meaning. And perhaps, just perhaps, our corner of the cosmos is a little quieter than average, a little more spacious, a little more misleading in the most innocent way. Perhaps the final question is not whether the universe is empty, but whether emptiness itself is what gives the universe meaning. Because when we strip away the stars, the galaxies, the glowing threads of matter, what remains is not nothing, but an immense pause, a silence so vast it shapes everything that dares to exist within it. We are accustomed to defining reality by objects, by things we can name, count, catalog, and point to. Yet the universe seems to resist this instinct, offering instead a reality where the distances matter more than the destinations, where absence outweighs presence by an almost unimaginable margin. It is as if the cosmos is composed less like a sentence full of words, and more like a poem built from spacing, rhythm, and breath. In this light, the emptiness between galaxies is not a failure of creation. It is the canvas that allows creation to remain legible. Without vast quiet zones, gravity would shout over itself, stars would burn too fast, collisions would erase memory before it could form. Emptiness slows the universe down, gives it patience, gives it time to remember its own story. Throughout this journey, we followed a single unsettling idea, that our place in the cosmos might sit inside a slightly quieter region, a softer echo chamber that subtly shapes what we hear when we listen for expansion, history, and scale. And rather than diminishing our understanding, this possibility deepens it, because it reminds us that knowledge is always local before it becomes universal. The measurements remain honest, the equations remain faithful, but perspective adds tone, like listening to the same melody from different seats in a vast hall. And perhaps the universe is not asking us to eliminate this perspective, but to acknowledge it, to weave it consciously into our interpretations. If there is a lesson hidden here, it is not shouted. It arrives quietly, the way cosmic truths often do. That understanding is not achieved by filling every gap, but by learning which gaps are essential. That silence is not ignorance, but structure. So when we step back and look at the full arc of this story, from the possibility of living in a cosmic void to the way expansion, structure, and measurement intertwine, we are left with a universe that feels less like a machine and more like a meditation. A reality that speaks not through excess, but through restraint, Perhaps the universe is not defined by what exists, but by the immense spaces that allow existence to endure. And perhaps emptiness is not the opposite of meaning, but its most fluent language. If that is true, then the question we carry forward is not how to conquer the void, but how to listen to it more carefully.